Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you are enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you'd like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have 3 tiers of support: the fan level at $3 per month, the supporter level at $7 per month, and the champion level at $20 per month. Benefits of joining the Tennis IQ podcast community include episode transcripts, participation in book club discussions, and access to monthly masterclasses with me and Josh. For more on these benefits of support, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today Josh and I are going to talk about essentially beliefs in language and how that they translate into some of the emotions that we feel prior to playing a match or even during a match. And try to get all of you to think a little bit more about how exactly you're talking to yourself. So, the beliefs that we have, the language that we they way we talk to ourselves and the way we talk to others about competition, and maybe also some of the things that we hear, they have a really big impact on our emotions. And in some ways, they're inextricably linked to that emotional experience. And we're going to talk about some very specific phrases that are used. That I'm sure, Josh, you've heard these. And I'm going to go through a list of what these are, and then we can start to unpack sort of the beliefs and where they come from. So just a question. Have you ever noticed yourself saying one of the following phrases? I have to win today. I need to win today. This is a must-win match. I have to play well today. I need to play well. I can't lose. Losing today would be the worst thing ever. I can't take another loss. So, Josh, how often have you heard phrases like that? Or, one thing I didn't include were the shoulds. So I should win, and etc. But how often do you hear phrases like this from the players that you work with?
All the time. And I think for a lot of players, maybe for most players, it is sort of their default state. Before we start, diving into the mental game, before we start really looking at their self-talk and trying to build skills around self-talk, I think for a lot of players that this really is their default state. And I think you brought up a lot of good examples. I often hear people say things like I should win, I'm supposed to win. I'm expected to win. On paper, I should win this based on probably UTR. And yeah, I think this is a really interesting topic for a number of reasons. Number one, because of how prevalent it is, because of how common it is for people to use these words. And I've even heard I've heard professional players use the same sorts of words and phrases for themselves, right? That some of the best players in the world will talk this way. But I think that first of all, I think it's interesting to look at where this comes from, which we can certainly talk more about from sort of an evolutionary standpoint. And we can also talk about the impact of talking like this to yourself. And I know we've touched on similar topics in different episodes a little bit, but I think this episode will be a nice way to fully unpack that and to really, and to hopefully get people that are listening to think about the impact of some of the things that they're saying to themselves. I think when most people think back to matches where they've been at their best, it's generally not when there's such expectations. It's generally not when you're saying, I need to win this, I have to win this, I'm supposed to. That's generally doesn't bring out people's best level of tennis. What tends to work best is when, people are able to maybe understand the pressures at play and not focus so much on that expectation piece and focus more on on their standards, on their controllable factors, on their process. And I think that when people are thinking like this, and saying some of these specific things to themselves, it tends to be very result based, and ultimately comes from a place of can come from this place of fear, which I think evolutionarily, in terms of why we were using some of these phrases in the first place, like I need to do this, right? That makes sense, right, from an evolutionary standpoint, where you know thousands of years ago, we, as our species really needed to survive or needed to get food or reproduction or different sorts of things. And us us viewing those things in those sorts of terms really made sense. But now, as sort of as we've evolved, as we live in a modern society, that's that really isn't the case for most people, or for most people certainly that are listening to this. And I think it's important to be able to, number one, be aware of our self-talk and be able to analyze it and understand where it came from, and then also understand the impact, and often the negative deleterious impact that our self-talk has when it's in this way.
Yeah, because when it is in this way, it tends to ratchet up the pressure, like you said, Josh, the expectations. And yeah, generally, most people don't play well under a certain level of pressure. Of course, there's always a little bit of pressure, and having the right perspective on it makes sense. But if we're using sort of these, demanding types of phrases, like I must play well, or I have to, I need to, then you're putting yourself in a really tough spot, because it's what happens if you don't. And then the brain sort of runs wild on that. But as you mentioned, Josh, evolutionarily, and if we could also maybe tie this a bit to like Abraham Maslow's, hierarchy, we'll call it a quote unquote hierarchy of needs. If we look at those physiological needs, where it is about survival, more about breathable air, food, water, shelter, being warm, or maybe in our world now, maybe cooling off a bit. Using language like I have to, I need to, I must, it's actually functional at that level. At that level of needs, you might yes, I need to find something to eat. I need to find a place to cool off or to warm up. I need some place to, get shelter from a storm or something. So that language is actually functional at the survival, at the physiological need level. But as you said, Josh, most people certainly listening to this podcast are not in that situation on a day-to-day basis. And certainly a tennis match is not an existential need. It's not a survival kind of thing. The loser, there's no sort of consequence of life or death based on a tennis match. So the language that is functional at a physiological level, a survival level, is not functional at a higher level, where on the tennis court, what are we really trying to satisfy? We're trying to become the best players we can become. So we're trying to satisfy maybe a need for mastery. Maybe it's a need for positive relationships in a community. Of course we want to win, and that's part of that aspect as well. But we know that nothing terrible really will happen if we lose, because everyone who's listening to this has lost. And guess what? You're still here. So the musts, needs, have tos are not necessarily, they're not functional here. And in fact, that's why we would label them irrational beliefs, because they're not true. It's not even logical to say I must win this match, because everything can be dealt with. And it's just not helpful, right? Especially from the perspective of pressure. So, we have to learn how to transform some of this language and to be aware of it. And because it is all around us, it not only comes from, like, as you said, Josh, the default, but everybody else has got this default thinking, and then you're hearing it on the Tennis Channel or Eurosport or ESPN. People are talking about that kind of thing. And so, of course, you're going to talk that way because it's somewhat rewarded. It's somewhat accepted that, oh, yeah, this is a must win for us, or this is a must win match kind of thing. You get validated when you use that language. And so we have to realize it's not functional. It's not actually a rational way to speak to yourself in order to enjoy competition more, to improve more, to learn to embrace the challenges of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think that oftentimes I think that often when people can actually analyze their self-talk and can actually see that they're saying either write it down through an exercise, or you discuss it and you say, somebody says, okay, this is how I was talking to myself at before a match or at this point during a match. Rationally, they recognize that these sorts of things don't help them. But in the moment, it does feel like in a certain way it's hardwired, right? Either through sort of that evolutionary piece or through our environment in terms of maybe people are hearing it from parents or from coaches, or when they watch TV and they watch pro tennis. And it's the same type of same type of ways of talking that people use in other sports as well. And Brian, I think you brought this up before we started recording, but in, let's say, sports where there's standings and there's playoffs and things like that, it's very common for commentators to say, this is a must-win game. But and then you hear the same thing from coaches and players as well. Um, and I think it's very easy, whether it's sort of in that conscious way of talking about it out loud or talking about it to oneself, or just sort of a subconscious way of thinking about it in general, to almost get this sort of tunnel vision about each match we play or each tournament we play, like it's the most important thing in the world. I need to do well here. I need to win matches here. And can we come up with reasons why that is? Of course. Maybe that is because somebody is striving to play in college, or striving to get a college scholarship, or because their UTR is lower than they think it should be. And they feel like this is the opportunity to raise it, or they're coming back from an injury and this is their chance to prove it to themselves. We can always find reasons why this particular match or this particular tournament is so important. And, in some way, and it is generally important to some extent. However, I think if we view it in this way as, this is the most important thing ever, I need to do well, I have to do well, the amount of pressure that it puts on us, it just makes it really decreases the chance of us actually performing the way that we want to, and that we're capable of. Where I think instead, if we can keep it in more of a healthy perspective and understand that we've played in many matches and tournaments in the past, we've won plenty of matches, we've lost plenty of matches, and the same will continue in the future. And this is just another test. Let's see sort of where I'm at this week or this weekend or whatever it may be. And let's try to do my best. But win or lose, I'm still the same person fundamentally. Nothing's changed. And, and in that next tournament or in that next match, I'm going to try to do it again and try to do a little bit better. So I think if we can, I think what happens with this way of thinking is we lose that perspective. We completely lose that perspective, and it feels like necessity. Winning feels like necessity. Performance feels like necessity. And then when this happens, it actually backfires. It makes that performance so much harder to actually make happen. And I think people get this. I think people get this logically, rationally, but actually putting it into practice, I think, is a lot harder for people. Actually being aware of those thoughts, of their self-talk in the moment, can be challenging. And then trying to improve on that over time can also be a challenge. So I think it makes sense to a lot of people. They recognize, what, I've had situations where I've talked to myself like this, and it probably didn't help me. In fact, it It certainly didn't. It hurt me. I played tight. I wasn't breathing the way that I wanted to. Um, and and I tend to play best when I can be a little more relaxed and let go a little bit more. But in the moment, actually doing that can be a challenge. And I think we could talk about some strategies for that. But I think as we think about the issue overall, I think that's the a way that I see it. That a lot of people, I guess, understand that, but actually putting it into action, sometimes it can be easier said than done.
I think a good exercise would be, I'm sure most of the people who are listening watch tennis on TV or watch other sports, is listen to what coaches, players, and broadcasters say. Listen for the have tos and the musts. And then when you hear it, just ask yourself and evaluate the statement. Is it actually true? Is it actually true in this moment that they must do this or have to do that? You could probably come up with ways of verifying, oh, yeah, they have to win this game because it's the 7th game, and if they don't win, then they won't go on to the next round. Okay. But as we've said, a lot of this language comes from survival needs and where it is functional. So, okay, they lose a game 7, or they lose a playoff game, or you lose the final of a tournament. It's not over. The story continues, and I think one of the, I think maybe we mentioned this video before, Josh, but maybe not. There's a great video that you can find on YouTube of a very short conversation between Kobe Bryant and Jamel Hill. And Kobe Bryant is talking about how failure doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist because, as he said, the story continues. So yeah, you lose that final. Guess what? The story continues, hopefully, for you. The next day, you show up to practice. You start working on it again. And you hopefully learn from whatever just happened the day before. And that applies to all sports. If you decide not to continue, then, okay, maybe then you would label something as a failure. But that's almost never the case. So I'd highly recommend that people go listen to or watch that video where Kobe Bryant talks about how failure doesn't exist. Because I think failure in itself, using that word, it's a judgment, it's a value assignment to something. And in many ways, it's overly harsh, and I think we're too casual with how we use the term. So if we can understand that, failure, if we can use that philosophy, failure doesn't exist. If we understand that we're not going to die because of a match or have some other physiological need thwarted because of a match, then we can move on to thinking about better ways of thinking that can help promote healthier approaches to competition. Now, I wanted to share an example of a coach who I think gets it. A lot of coaches will use the language that we discussed today. Broadcasters will, players will. But this is a coach who gets it. And he's going to change the must to something else that we'll talk about. So this is Jurgen Klopp being interviewed. So Jurgen Klopp, most recently manager of Liverpool Football Club in the English Premier League, just stepped down at the end of the season. And so this is an interview from a few years ago, and he's being asked about the fact that there's a 6-point gap between them and whoever's at the top of the table. And being asked, is this more of a must-not-lose game as opposed to a must-win game? And so Klopp starts laughing, and he says, I'm sorry. It's because maybe there are other people who are smarter than me and can see it this way, but I don't see it like this. For me, it's 100% a want to win game. It's like, yeah, it's want to win. It's 100% with all I have. This must win, this must thing, I never understood because that doesn't change the chances. As you said before, Josh, in fact, it probably decreases the chances when you talk about that way. So what did Jurgen Klopp do here? He took a demand, like we must do this, and he changed it to a preference, meaning we want to do this, and we're going to do everything we can to make it happen. But there's a chance that it won't. And you know what? In the end, we'll deal with that. We'll figure it out. The story continues. Whether that's this season or next season, it keeps going. And I think that's one of the strategies that we want to be aware of is, can you change must or have tos to preferences? Instead of demands, can we change it to a preference? Of course, we all want to win. Now we get centered on trying to do that to the best of our ability. But what takes real courage, in my opinion, Josh, is saying I want to win, doing everything I can, knowing that I might fail or I might lose. And that takes a lot of guts. And a lot of players don't necessarily put all those pieces together. They may have these demands, and then they come up with excuses for perhaps why they didn't end up winning in the end. But either way, the story continues.
I think thinking about it in those terms helps people keep it in perspective. That, you know what, we're going to do everything that we can to win. We certainly want to win, but no matter what, the story continues. I would even say, even after a player's career, the story can continue, right? You see people go into coaching or go into commentary or go into different sorts of things, and they can continue making an impact in the sport in their own way. I also think what I like about his the way that he's seeing it is, it's a certain respect and it's a certain understanding of the sport overall. Understanding that anything can happen anytime we're out there, right? Where these are two professional, teams of the highest level playing against each other. Anybody can win. And I think we want to have the same perspective with our own tennis, that, okay, I'm playing in this match. I can beat my opponent, and my opponent can't beat me. And that sounds maybe overly basic, but I think it's true. And I think, it's easy for people to cast these judgments or expectations before they play. Oh, I should win. I'm 0.6 points higher, 0.6 UTR points higher than my opponent. Or, you know what, this is going to be really tough. My opponent is a full point higher than me. Or even, if we're thinking NTRP levels, right? Maybe it's a half point, right? In the, a 3-0 plays a 3-5, or 3-5 plays a 4-0, or whatever it may be. And I think, what I will often push back with is, okay, well, we can think about top WTA, ATP players in the world, and we can think back to times where all of them have lost to people ranked significantly lower than them. And I can think back to examples of this for really each of the top legendary players. And I think people get that, and people can think back to those moments. So I think it's just, we want to recognize that anybody can beat anybody. We want to go in with the attitude that we want to respect whoever we play, because people can surprise us. People can play well. Just because we assume somebody's a certain level, or just because they have a certain rating or ranking, they can play great on a particular day. They could have worked on and improved on a certain aspect of their game. We don't know that. So the player that we're playing against on that particular day may be very different from that rating or ranking or expectation that we have for them in the first place. And we're not playing that ranking. We're not playing that particular UTR or that expectation that we have. We're playing whoever's on the other side of the net from us. And the same goes when our expectations go the other way, and we expect somebody to be, this amazing player. They're, ranked higher than us, or maybe more accomplished, or they have a certain reputation. And when that happens, I think sometimes we put somebody on a pedestal too much. We build them up so much in our head, and we almost think that it's impossible for them to lose. And I think, again, the same thing. Can we think about top players losing to lower ranked players? Can we think about upsets, right? They happen. They happen quite a bit. They happen with everybody. So it's just about, let's not go in with such expectations. Let's, and let's not be so result focused. Obviously, we care about results. Everybody does. We're competitors ultimately. But if that's the main focus, we sort of lose we sort of lose the big picture. We lose the big picture, which is about us trying to do our best whenever we're out there, us trying to focus on our process, trying to, master each piece of the game and trying to give our best effort, or give our best in each of these pieces whenever we're out there, rather than our attention being so much on, am I going to win? Am I going to lose? I should win. I should, this is going to be really tough, and focusing on that way. I think if we can accept some of that, accept that uncertainty, even when we think it is certain because of, maybe rankings, ratings, things like that. If we can accept that there is uncertainty, then we can focus on what needs to be done instead and focus more on our process.
Yeah. I think, and we haven't really talked about this one yet. I made it one of the examples, but I think one of the more dangerous statements you can make going into a match is, I need to play well. We both know that most of the time you're actually not going to play well. No one's playing a 10 out of 10 every single day. And sometimes you're going to play 2 out of 10. But that doesn't mean you're going to lose. Especially if you can keep your mental and emotional game in play. We've referred to the famous Jack Nicklaus quote about the art of playing badly well, knowing that on some days you won't have it physically, but if you can stay in the competition mentally and emotionally, you can work through it. Certainly Brad Gilbert's Winning Ugly is all about that. It's all about not playing well, but still sticking to the rest of your game, mentally, emotionally, footwork, whatever, so that you have a chance. So to me, that's another one that we have to turn into a preference, which is, I want to play well, and I'm going to do everything I can to play well. This might be a slight tangent, Josh, but I do feel like people are also influenced by articles or other maybe posts in which, and some of our esteemed colleagues write these things, like on LinkedIn, they'll write a post about something like, mentally tough athletes always do this. Mentally tough athletes never do that. And I don't like those posts, because I would call that bullshit. Because every champion that we have seen, you can find moments in which they are doing exactly what you said they never do. Or they're not doing that thing that you said that they always do. And it reminds me of the quote, and I think that this is important for listeners to understand, from Dan Millman, wrote The Peaceful Warrior. He said that there are no enlightened beings, only enlightened moments. So I translate that from a tennis perspective as like, there are no mentally tough tennis players. There are only moments of mental toughness or mental strength. Now, a Novak Djokovic or a Rafael Nadal or Iga Swiatek, they have more moments than your average player. But they also have some moments in which they're not enlightened. They have some moments in which they are maybe not as mentally disciplined or mentally strong as they could be. They're not perfect. None of us are. So I find sometimes, Josh, like that holding up this standard of always and never can be problematic. That language in itself is also not functional for what we're trying to do, because what does it lead to? It leads to a lack of acceptance of yourself as a fallible human being playing a very difficult sport. Right? Oh, they never make mistakes. Oh, they never do this. It's not true. They do. They just minimize that. They have accepted themselves as imperfect beings playing a very difficult sport. So be aware of, like, when you read a post like that, understand that it's wrong. Always and never should not be associated with how athletes are. They are just as fallible as the rest of us, but they have worked on their craft to the point where they have really minimized those moments of mental weakness or lack of discipline. So we're all on that path to learning to minimize some of those things. And that's part of the story. That is part of the journey. So accept that that's true. Accept yourself for who you are, because that's really a big key in terms of flourishing and overall well-being, is acceptance of yourself. Yet, of course, you still want to improve. So I know that was a little bit of a tangent, Josh, but that's been like percolating in my mind. Like I had this rant that I wanted to go off on all those sort of LinkedIn posts, and I know you've seen them. We see them from a lot of people that we are connected with or follow.
Yeah, I think I've definitely definitely seen those, and sometimes it's almost this pop. You just see people using these sorts of terms as well. I see it with tennis commentators quite a bit as well, and it's like, oh well, Federer would never do that, or or things of that nature. And it's like, yeah, just like you said, we can think back to examples of all of the greats not being at their best, from a mental perspective, right? We could think of times where maybe they've lost their cool. We could think of times where maybe they've struggled under pressure. We could think of times where they haven't made the best decisions. And they're all human. They're all human, but they're the best in the world for a reason. And it's not just their physical abilities. It's that we can also think back to plenty of examples, generally more examples of times where they've been excellent, where they've been great, where they've managed to perform and outperform their opponents, which is why they're the best in the world and breaking records. But I think that's a great point, but I think it sort of, in a certain way, goes back to this point of of being very careful of expectations, right? If we expect the best players in the world to always be great or always be perfect, in a certain way, it makes us feel like we are lesser. Makes us feel like, oh, well, they're able to do that, and I can't do that. So I guess that says, that doesn't say much about me. And I think, going back to that same point from that I was talking about before in terms of the expectation piece, and okay, I'm going into this match. How do my expectations impact the way that I'm the way that I'm gauging my chances? I think we often see that, when we play certain types of players, we're like, oh, well, this person is a point higher than us, UTR, or this person won this tournament last year. So they're going to, they're going to be unbelievable. I'm not going to have any chance against them. Where I think if we can understand that everybody has off days, everyone has days and moments of more mental strength and days and moments where their mental game is weaker, then we understand that really anybody can beat anybody. And are there certain days where, in certain matches where there's a favorite? Yes, absolutely. Are there certain people that are more likely to beat another person? Yes. But the fact, the fact is that we want to, we want to just be very careful of that, whether we're analyzing, you know, professional players, whether we're analyzing our peers. I think it's definitely something that we want to be careful of, and I'm glad you brought up that example.
So let's start to wrap this up a little bit, Josh. Maybe summarize some things here, because we've been talking about different beliefs, different language to use. Have to, I have to do this. I need to do this. I must do this, or I can't stand something happening. Understanding that these phrases are functional at a certain level of human existence, but they're non-functional at a competition level, in something like tennis. And so to become more aware of yourself using it, to become more aware of hearing it out by commentators or other players. You may even, if you're the parent of a junior player, you may hear other parents using this type of thing, right? And it becomes sort of cultural. And understand that, you can tolerate losses. You can tolerate mistakes. The story continues. And that's the whole point, is that we stay on that journey. So yes, this language, from an evolutionary standpoint, has been functional to help human beings achieve its level of, of superiority in the world in terms of the animal kingdom, but it's not necessarily helping us as competitors or in our everyday lives. Any last thoughts from you, Josh?
Yeah, I guess one thing that I would say is, it starts with awareness. It starts with us being aware of both the ways that other people are talking about these sorts of things and the ways that we're talking about it, right? If we can catch ourselves as we're saying certain things that aren't so helpful, like I need to win, this is a must win, I have to win, I'm supposed to win, any of those sorts of things, we can probably think of some other examples. Um, if we can notice ourselves saying these things or be aware of ourselves saying it and ultimately catch it, um, you know, I think we want to get to a point where, okay, I'm saying these things to myself. There's almost like an alarm going off. It's like, okay, there I go again, right? Oh, you said it again. And I recognize this doesn't help me. And oh, there I said it again. And I don't need to judge that. I don't need to judge myself for saying those things. But if I'm aware of that and I'm aware of the impact of that, then I'm able to do something about it. Then I'm able to start shifting the way that I'm thinking and and maybe add in a more helpful thought. Maybe I'm able to question that thought and say, is this true? Is this helpful? Is this logical? Right? If I have that thought like I need to win. Okay, well, is that true? Well, I want to win. Well, it'd be great if I won. Well, I think I can win, but I don't actually need to. This isn't actually life or death. And I think when we can take a step back, question some of those thoughts, we're able to start putting it more into perspective. We're able to see the bigger picture and understand the irrationality of some of those thoughts that we're having in the first place and understand that they're really not helpful. In fact, that they really backfire. Us caring so much about winning and results and feeling like it's a necessity actually makes it a lot harder for us to achieve those in the first place. So I think, I would challenge people to try to bring that awareness piece into their self-talk. Try to catch themselves when they're not their own best friend, when they're not helping themselves, when their self-talk is getting in their way because it's adding significant pressure through using phrases like this. And and also just think back to moments where you've been at your best. And I would imagine that's probably not how you've talked to yourself in those sorts of moments. But I think, yeah, I think this is a really important topic. And glad that we were able to, devote an episode to covering it because we're constantly talking to ourselves. And I think without working on that skill of self-talk, and it really is a skill, it's very easy to get in our own way and actually hurt ourselves with our self-talk. But it's a skill that we can work on and build and improve on over time.
And so remember, the story continues. It's really more about the player you're becoming, not necessarily the player you are in this moment. And if you can understand that, then you can really start to change these beliefs and change this language in a more productive way. So thank you, Josh. I thought that was a really, really good conversation. That's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for me and Josh, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you are enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. And you can also check us out on Instagram. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast community. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.